Beneath the fragile vault of a muted dawn, the world lay silent and white, an endless expanse of wind-scoured snow and ice that stretched to horizons indistinguishable from heaven itself. In a shallow depression carved by centuries of drifting snow, a mother polar bear lay curled protectively around her newborn twins. Their downy fur was still damp from birth, and their tiny bodies shivered in the cold. But she pressed them close, radiating warmth from her own great bulk. In the hush before sunrise, she felt their faint heartbeat against her chest, a fragile promise of life in a realm as merciless as it was beautiful. All around her, the ice desert groaned and cracked as the tide pulled and pushed at its fractured edge. Each sound was a reminder. Here, in the high Arctic, life was born only to be tested anew. Instinct had led her to this hidden den weeks earlier, where the wind's howl would be muffled by layers of snow and ice. There, she would shelter her cubs through the long polar night. Now that dawn's pale light glimmered across the frozen ocean, her work as nursemaid would shift into that of teacher and protector, for the true world lay beyond the safety of the den. Gently, she shifted, lifting herself onto strong forearms and peering out through a narrow opening in the den wall. The twins' soft bleats echoed behind her as they stirred, sensing the stirrings of their first lesson. Each tiny snuffle told her they were ready. With a low rumble of encouragement, she nudged one cub forward, pressing its paws against the icy floor. It toppled like a ship in heavy seas, then scrambled back toward her warmth. She braced her massive head above the opening, sniffing the breeze for any warning of approaching danger. The taste of salt and sky filled her senses, as did the faint musk of the sea below. Out into the glimmering white she led them, her enormous form a living bridge between safety and the unknown. With careful steps, she guided her cubs along the ice's edge, pausing at each fissure and crack. Here was the first trial, teaching them to recognize unstable ice. A slight vibration told her the flow beyond had been undermined by warmer water below. She tapped its surface with a heavy paw, watching the cub's curious snout quiver. Then she turned, led her tiny charges back to firmer ground, and offered her flank for them to climb, an early lesson in reading the ice, in knowing when to proceed and when to bring them home to shelter. Later, after they had grown bolder, she brought them to the den of their first quarry, a breathing hole where seals, the kings of these waters, rose for air. Beneath a bright sky, she showed them the subtle shifts in the snow, the faint halo of powdered frost that marked where a seal had exhaled. She moved slowly, lowering her massive shoulder to the snow's surface, demonstrating how she could press and scrape to widen the hole. Each scrape was a lesson for her cubs, whose small paws patted and tested the edges in awkward mimicry of her power. When the hole lay open, black as obsidian against the white, she crouched in patient silence. The cubs huddled close, their eyes wide and uncomprehending at first. She nudged a small scrap of seal flesh, left over from her own successful hunt, toward them. Their first tentative mouths closed around the meat with clumsy eagerness, tasting of salt and life. Then, with a grace born of generations, she plunged her head into the hole, emerging with a writhing seal pup in her jaws. The cub's chirps of wonder spurred her to share the prize. She shook the pup free and patted it gently into the cub's reach. That first meal of real seal, skin and blubber alike, filled their bellies and began to forge the hunger that would drive their survival here. But the Arctic's savagery was never far behind its beauty. As the cubs waddled between gnawed bones, a distant rumble sent a thrill of tension through the air. Their mother froze, ears pricked. Beyond the furthest hummock of drifted snow, she smelled it. The scent of another bear, an adult male in the throes of mating season, when hunger and aggression could turn him into a predator of cubs. She rumbled low, gathering her cubs under her massive belly, pressing them into the snow. The cubs' eyes, full of burgeoning curiosity moments before, now mirrored her fierce alertness. She paced in a tight circle around them, every muscle coiled, every sigh of wind a possible harbinger of the male's approach. A great head, darker and broader, appeared over the ridge like a living shadow. The male bear's breath came in thunderous bellows that shook the air with raw power. He sniffed, his black muzzle lifting to catch their scent. The mother bear lowered her head, locking eyes with him in a silent standoff. She stood between him and her cubs as though she were the living fortress of ice. refusing to yield. From beneath her belly, the cubs let out small, frightened cries as the male's roar tested the wind. Finally, with a disdainful snort, he turned away, drawn by the scent of another female in estrus. The mother bear exhaled in relief, stamping her huge paw to firm the snow beneath her charges, and led her cubs away to safer ground. As spring pressed on and the sun mounted higher, the polar wind grew warmer, warm enough to threaten the integrity of their ice kingdom. On one morning, the sky burned with the promise of a solar storm, a fierce heat that would plunge them into fog and slush. The mother bear sensed the warning in a subtle shift. The creak of the ice grew more urgent. The wind carried a damp chill that spoke of melting. She knew this trial would be unlike any other. With her cubs tucked close, she led them across a plainscape of fractured floes and slushy patches, pressing them onto firmer ice where the water lapped gently at the edges. Thick fog crept in as the sun climbed. Visibility fell to mere meters. The cubs' small forms stumbled against patches of thin ice, plunging their paws into icy slush. She corrected them with gentle nudges and guided them toward a rocky island punctuating the whiteness, a haven carved by the sea itself. There, she huddled them beneath a wind-scoured ledge of rock. The solar storm's warmth settled into a heavy mist that dripped off her fur in icy beads and glazed the rocks with slippery sheets. For hours she stood vigilant, her muzzle lifted to sniff the shifting air, her great body a living shield against both cold and the unseen threats lurking beyond the mist. When at last the storm broke, the sun returned in brilliance that turned every droplet into a dancing prism. The cubs, exhausted but unscathed, rose on wobbly legs. Their mother nudged them to move on. Together they continued deeper into the thawing world, stepping beyond the storm's ruins and into a promise of greener ground, an echo of spring's triumphant return. In that harsh, beautiful realm, the mother bear remained both teacher and guardian. Each flicker of sun on melting ice, each crack of the floe, each scent carried on the breeze was a lesson for her young. As they vanished into the infinite white, she led them onward, into a future written on the shifting canvas of ice. Wind and sky, continuous yet ever-changing, their journey had only just begun. The pale twilight of mid-spring gave way to endless daylight as the ice desert around them shifted into a patchwork of floes and open water. The mother bear and her cubs stepped out from their rocky refuge, shedding the last vestiges of winter's storm into the shimmering haze. Every breath of the warm air carried new scents, thawing algae, the musk of distant walrus hauled out on sunlit ice, and the briny tang of seals moving beneath the surface. She rumbled softly to call her cubs close, guiding them over slabs of fissured ice that rattled beneath their paws. Their progress was cautious, paws testing each floe's edge as they learned to judge its strength under their weight. The first lesson of this season was to master the art of breaking ice for a fresh seal haul. She led them to a sealed breathing hole rimmed with snow, a thin crust concealing the black water beneath. With a powerful swipe of her mighty forelimb, she punched through the ice, shattering the brittle surface in a spray of crystalline shards. She felt their small bodies jolt with excitement as the seal rose, misting into the open, and she lunged with graceful fury. The cubs watched where she struck, eyes bright with wonder and a fierce hunger. Their first attempts were hesitant, tiny paws pattering at the hole, teeth grazing cold water, but one by one they managed to tear at the ice themselves. She stayed silent, allowing them the triumph of the catch, stepping in only when their efforts faltered, nudging broken blocks aside so they could seize their prize. With full bellies and shining eyes, the cubs tumbled over the snow, bodies bloated and giddy from the rich blubber. Yet the Arctic offered no respite. Beyond the next ridge lay open water always shifting with tides and currents. Fearless curiosity led one cub too close to the flecked edge of a drifting slab. In that instant, the ice cracked, sending a tremor underfoot. The cub froze, tiny muzzle peeking over the void. The mother was everywhere at once, paws thundering, body colliding with the flow's edge, its impact shoving it just enough for her cub to scramble back. She pressed her nose into his wet back, heart thrumming with relief. In that single moment, she taught him the cost of carelessness and the price she would pay to keep him safe. Night did not come, but the sky shifted in hue as midday stretched into endless afternoon. Under its glow, the The mother guided her cubs toward a vast expanse of softer ice where seals basked on sun-warmed patches. They stalked in silence, each step measured and deliberate. When the moment came, she sprang with thunderous force. Seizing a fat pup, the cubs erupted in chirps of joy, their small bodies shaking with excitement. She tore away pieces of blubber and skin, handing each small morsel to her young ones. They chewed with ravenous enthusiasm, the taste of sea life filling their lungs with wild wonder. But spring's warmth also brought new dangers. A male bear, bulked with fat from winter kills, lay hidden behind a snowbank a short distance away. His approach was silent, only the shift of snow underweight gave him away. The mother spotted him through the haze of daylight. Fang-white muzzle lifting, she grunted in warning, ushering her cubs behind her. The male rose to his full height. Towering, teeth bared, he tested her resolve with a deep, resonant rumble. She stood firm, her posture unyielding, shielding her cubs behind her great form. The male paced, sniffing greedily at the air. Dusty cries from the cubs filled the space between them all. A final snort of defiance from him, and he turned away, retreating into the maze of sunlit ice. Victory was hers. Her roar echoed over the plains, a declaration that this new life, her cubs, belonged to her alone. Into early summer they pressed on, and ice gave way to navigable waterways. The mother sensed the changing currents, the slow retreat of the pack sea toward the north. Now, the cubs needed to learn the art of swimming. She led them to a sheltered channel where the sea lapped gently at a narrow shore. Taking a deep breath, she plunged in, powerful limbs carving through frigid water. The cubs hesitated, tiny ears flattened, eyes wide as saucers. A low call drew them in. With a shake that sent brine flying, she surfaced, encouraging them with soft growls. Their first strokes were wild and trembling, paws flailing to stay afloat. But under her watchful eye, they paddled toward her, mouths hanging open in thrilled surprise at the cold rush around them. When they finally clawed onto her broad back, she lumbered ashore, tossing them onto the safety of the ice. She pressed her nose against their shivering forms, offering comfort and pride at their bravery. Each day, the cubs grew stronger in water. They learned to navigate small currents, to dive beneath the surface for fish, and to trust their mother's guidance. She watched them with quiet satisfaction, her heart lifting at their progress. Yet she remained vigilant. A sudden storm could blow in, skies darkening as quickly as night, winds whipping up frothy waves that could capsize a young swimmer. One afternoon, clouds roiled low across the horizon. Light faded beneath a blanket of slate-gray sky. The cubs were mid-channel when a gust snatched them off balance. They splashed and flailed, struggling against the rising swell. The mother darted into the water, claws trailing the surface, muscles churning. She reached them in powerful strides, gripping the smallest cub nape first in her jaws and carrying him to shore. The second she guided with a gentle nudge. Once reunited, the trio found shelter behind a ridge of ice, pressing close as thunderous waves rolled past. When the storm passed, they emerged, a little wiser, a little more wary of the sky above. In the warm light of high summer, the frozen world blossomed with life. The tundra beyond the ice edge turned pale green, and the air resonated with the cries of migratory birds. Arctic foxes and hares played along the shoreline's meltwater channels. The mother led her cubs inland, teaching them to track the fleeting herds of caribou that ventured to the riverbanks. Their first encounter was chaotic, herds pounding the earth with hooves, dust kicking into the sunlit air. The cubs crouched beside her, hearts drumming as they watched a calf break away. She demonstrated the art of stillness, shifting nothing but her eyes, waiting for the calf to wander close, then lunging with silent power. The cubs screamed in delight as she toyed with her catch before delivering the meat. Afterward, she nudged her cubs forward to taste caribou flesh, the rich flavor a new sustenance for their growing frames. Yet even as she taught them the ways of land and sea, she felt the subtle pull of change. Autumn's shadow was already creeping into the air. The days shortened imperceptibly, breezes carried a sharper edge, and the ice began to reform at the water's margins. Mothers everywhere began the slow return to denning grounds, seeking sheltered spots to birth new life. For her cubs, the coming freeze would mean a return to ice hunting and the dangers of winter. She pressed them close, nuzzling their sleek hides, imprinting her scent alongside the memory of summer's warmth. At dusk, an endless golden hue that lingered on the horizon, she gathered her cubs upon a high bluff overlooking the sea. There, beneath the soft aurora of early autumn's polar twilight, she spoke not with words but with the rumble of reassurance. She would teach them everything she knew: how to read the ice's strength, how to hunt seals from breathing holes, how to swim in open water, and how to stand firm against any rival. Above all, she would teach them the quiet stoicism of survival, the knowledge that life in the Arctic was a constant negotiation with the elements, a dance between vulnerability and power. As they settled in for the long night ahead, the cubs nestled beneath her thick pelt, and she drifted into a vigilant half-sleep, ears twitching at every distant crack of ice. Tomorrow, the world would grow colder again. Storms would come, ice would shift, predators would roam, but so long as they had each other, she knew the promise of new life would endure. In the hush of that Arctic eve, she whispered a silent vow to her cubs, to guide them through every trial, to stand between them and every threat, and to see them into the dawn of many more seasons on the edge of the world. As the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long, rosy shadows over the fractured ice, I felt the first true chill of approaching winter. The endless summer light was giving way to an Arctic dusk that would soon linger for hours, each breath of wind carrying the promise of snow. I drew my cubs close, pressing them beneath my guard, two small hearts beating against my flanks. So eager for the next adventure, so utterly trusting in my strength. Their clipped chirps spoke of excitement, but I knew their delight must be tempered with caution. The world beyond the thin ribbon of daylight could turn fierce without warning. We set out across a shifting mosaic of floes, each slab of ice a lesson in balance. I taught them to feel the give of the surface beneath their paws, to test with one tentative step and only then to commit their weight. Too far from shore, and the floe might crack under them; too close, and we risked being pinned against the landfast ice when storms drove the pack inshore. The cubs stumbled at first, small limbs slipping in the slush at the edges, but each misstep brought a gentle nudge, a low rumble of encouragement, and they rose again, undaunted. On the third day of our journey, we came to an ice ridge raised like the spine of some ancient beast. Here, wind had piled the drifts deep, sculpting snow into hollowed hollows and low caverns. I led my cubs to a sheltered nook beneath an overhang, its entrance arched by sharp icicles that caught the pale light. As I crouched to press my muzzle against the cold rock, I glanced back at them, wide-eyed, bright with the innocence of new hunters. In a voice soft as falling frost, I reminded them, "Here you will learn the final lesson of the den, the place where we will shelter through the first storms. The long, hungry nights that wait beyond autumn's end." With paws as eager as tiny paws can be, they began to dig. First, they scraped at the snow in hurried jabs, leaping back when the cold bit through their fur. I demonstrated methodical, scraping sweeps with my claws, first to clear a smooth floor, then to hollow out walls thick enough to hold back the wind. The snow fell in soft flakes at their feet, and each cascade became another layer letting light into our hiding place. As I worked, my mind floated through the seasons that lay behind us: birth in the dead of winter, the long thaw, the dance of hunts, and the storm that had nearly swallowed us whole. Now we built our sanctuary for a different kind of trial. By the time the hollow measured a bear's breadth in height, my cubs were panting, sides heaving with the effort. I guided their small paws, showing them the strength that came from slow, deliberate movement. Push, I rumbled. Dig, make this space our fortress. Above us, the wind whistled through cracks in the ice, but within our den, snow walls stood solid, insulating us from the relentless Arctic breath. That evening, safe inside our snow chamber, I curled around my cubs. Their fur, once brilliant white, now carried the smudges of earth and ice. I bent my head and pressed each cheek against theirs in turn, filling them with the warmth they would rely on when the world outside turned cold and blind. Through the thin snow above, I could see flickers of northern lights, emerald waves rippling against an indigo sky. A silent benediction for our home. The roar of the first real blizzard came before dawn, shaking the den walls with thunderous gale. I lay with ears flat, eyes half closed against the gusts that rattled our snow roof. My cubs huddled at my sides, their small bodies trembling against the onslaught. I held them closer still, my limbs a shield against the storm's fury. Each drift of snow settled thicker around us, and for hours the world was nothing but roaring white. I whispered low promises into their ears, that I would never let the wind spill into our hearts, that I would stand firm while the storm raged, that we would see the sunrise again. When the wind finally abated, a hush followed, so complete it felt like the earth itself was holding its breath. I pushed away snow to peer out. Beyond the entrance lay a stark, quiet world. Ice pillars stood like pillars of a frozen cathedral, and the last flurries drifted like ash. I coaxed my cubs forward, guiding them through the narrow tunnel we had carved. The air was brittle, each breath a crystalline plume. They blinked against the brightness, but their eyes shone with triumph. In the days that followed, we emerged into a landscape reborn. The ice had reconnected into broad plains, repaired by the storm's drifting snow, and the sea beyond beckoned with open leads where seals congregated to breathe and bask. Together, we hunted again, first timid, then bold. I showed my cubs how to wait beside a breathing hole, still as carved stone, until the faint mist tipped off a seal's presence. One cub jerked forward too soon and missed his mark, plunging a forepaw into freezing water. I slapped the ice to widen the hole, then nudged a stunned pup back to shore. Patience, I taught them. Cold water was a trial, but one they would master. As the pack edge receded northward once more, we followed the shifting line, a family caught in the tide of seasons. Summer's pale sun returned, and with it the world thawed around us, exposing marine grasses and rocky outcrops where in summer the Arctic foxes would play. My cubs dug at the moss and lichen, tasting new greens on a world that had once been frozen white. Each new flavor was a lesson in abundance, a reminder that survival demanded both strength and adaptability. By the time the sun dipped again into the pre-autumn gloom, my cubs were nearly as tall on their legs as I had been when I first raised them. Their fur shone with health. Their eyes glowed with the spark of independence. Yet they still turned to me at each crossroad, whether to trust broken ice or to retreat to safety, reminding me that the bond we share runs deeper than blood. On our final day before the long, starless night, I led them one last time to the den we had hollowed months before. There, beneath the brittle snow and ice, we would wait out the darkest weeks together. As I lay down to cradle them one final time, my heart swelled with both pride and fierce protection. In their rising breaths I heard the echo of my own cubhood and the promise of a future beyond my own years. Outside, the first snowflakes of the coming winter drifted down, each a silent testament to our place in this majestic, unforgiving realm. In that quiet sanctuary of ice, I whispered once more, "Rest, my children, for tomorrow the world will be white again, and we will face it as one." When the Arctic sky finally surrendered its last glimmer of daylight and the world fell into the long, silken hush of polar night, we huddled together in our snow-carved den, 3 living hearts beating beneath layers of ice and silence. Above us, the storm that had gathered since autumn's first chill rattled against our roof in thunderous gusts. Yet within our womb of frost, all was calm and warm. I pressed my cubs close, feeling their steady breaths beneath my fur, and whispered the final lessons I could teach: how to share warmth in the coldest dark, how to trust the storm to pass, and how to carry hope in the depths of night. The hours stretched like an eternity, and I listened to the rhythm of their sleep, softer and more even now that they were grown strong. Every so often, one would stir and snuffle at my side, learning still the comfort of my presence. Outside, the ice shifted and sighed as though it, too, were alive, reminding me of our timeless bond with this silent land. I let my mind drift across the seasons behind us. The first fragile dawn when they opened their eyes, the thrill of breaking seal holes, the terror of storms, the taste of moss and caribou, the lesson of patience by the river. Each memory was a stepping stone leading them toward independence. Yet this den remained the heart of our small world. Then came the moment I had waited for, the day when the wind changed, carrying not the bitter sting of winter but the soft promise of returning light. A faint glow crept across the underbelly of the ice overhead, and the cubs stirred, blinking against the darkness. I nuzzled them gently, guiding their paws toward the den's entrance. With one powerful shove, I widened the tunnel, and pale dawn filtered through, painting the snow with hues of lavender and gold. They emerged blinking into a world remade by spring's first breath. Outside, the ice had smoothed into a pristine plain of powdery white. A crust of new snow lay upon the old, and tiny footprints, hares and lemmings, danced across the surface. I led my cubs toward a nearby breathing hole, now frozen only by a thin veil of ice. They watched with awe as I scraped away the surface, revealing dark water beneath. When a seal pup exhaled, sending a ghostly mist into the dawn, I lunged with the grace born of necessity. My cubs crouched at my side, muscles coiled, then burst forward in mimicry of my strike. Their jaws snapped around small fragments of flesh, and for a moment, their yelps of delight rang out like birdsong in the silent morning. But the day's greatest lesson lay beyond this first hunt. I led them northward, across the glimmering expanse, toward the rise of broken ice piled in a great ridge. There, in the crevices of snow-packed walls, I showed them the dens of ancient polar lore, caverns hollowed out by mothers before them. Where new life once trembled in the womb, I watched their eyes, bright with curiosity, and I felt the fierce pull of time. Soon they would leave my side to carve their own paths across these windswept plains. As the sun climbed higher, the Arctic's long winter gave way to a pale, fleeting warmth. We practiced hunting together in ever greater challenges, waiting beside openings in the ice that had shifted with the spring tides, stalking wary seals on sunlit ice floes, even breaking through crusted banks to find freshwater pools where fish still lingered in the melting streams. With each success, they grew more confident. With each stumble, they earned the gentle counsel of my muzzle nudging them back to safety. One evening, under a sky awash in pastel twilight, we reached the edge of the pack ice once more. The horizon shimmered with the ghostly glow of auroras curling overhead, an Alaskan sky full of light and motion. I paused, towering over my cubs, and they nestled at my feet, gazing out at the sea that had once borne my own solitary voyage of survival. Their breaths came in soft mists, and I felt both pride and a deep, aching sorrow. This was the threshold between mother and cub, between shared strength and the call of the wild that would soon guide them alone. In the gentle hush before night fully fell, I spoke to them, not in words, but in the quiet nudge of my head and the warmth of my flank. I implored them to remember these lessons, to honor the ice as both mother and adversary, to heed the call of hunger with patience and respect, to find courage in the face of storms and rivals, and to carry always the fierce love that had kept them safe from birth. They blinked up at me, ears angled forward, as if committing each nuance to memory. Then, with a soft rumble of farewell, I straightened and stepped back. My cubs followed me to the water's edge, pausing a final time to look northward. I watched as they hesitated, small silhouettes against the vast ice, and then without a backward glance, they bounded onto the floe. I never hesitated, my work as mother complete. I turned inland, toward hidden valleys still ripe with seal dens and spring's stubborn promise. As I padded away, the cubs' figures grew smaller under the swirling northern lights. On that ridge of ice, under all the storms and silent nights, our story of survival, of fierce protection and shared triumph, would remain written in paw prints and memories of snow. Their future lay beyond my watch, but I carried them always in my heart, two bright stars born of Arctic frost, now free to shine across the boundless white and carry forth the legacy of a mother's unyielding will to keep them alive.